This past weekend, President Cyril Ramaphosa briefed Chinese President Xi Jin Ping on the upcoming African leaders' peace mission to Ukraine and Russia. President Ramaphosa is expected to be joined by his counterparts, including the president of the Comoros Island and current president of the African Union, Othman Ghazali, the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, president of Senegal, Macky, Sall, the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, and the president of Zambia as well, Hakainde Hichilema. The presidency says Ramaphosa noted the peace plan that has been proposed by China and affirmed South Africa and the African leaders' support of initiatives that are aimed at a peaceful resolution of the conflict. President Xi Jin Ping also commended the initiative by the African continent and acknowledged the impact the conflict has had on human lives and on food security on the continent. But to talk more about this and what this all entails for the upcoming BRICS summit as well, we are joined by Brian Comoros. He is a Pan-Africanist and a lawyer as well. Brian, thank you. It's great to have you here on Morning Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
So the presidency's been very quiet in announcing the actual date of when the African heads of state are expected to be traveling to Russia and Ukraine and other details. They're slowly starting to emerge. But, you know, why do you think the secrecy and all of the issues behind this?
There is a live war going on in Ukraine at the moment. And as you know, the depth of the polarization is such that disclosing all details would render these six heads of state fairly insecure. There are neo-Nazi groups, there are fundamentalist groups, there are all sorts of groups that are engaged in the Ukrainian war.
So let's look at this, and we've spoken through the countries that will be embarking and the leaders of state that will be embarking on this particular peace initiative. We've got Egypt, the Republic of Congo, Senegal, Uganda, and Zambia. We also mentioned the Comoros and, of course, the president of the African Union. If we look at these countries individually, and of course there are those that are criticizing this and there are those that are praising it, but if we look at these countries that are embarking on that, what could they possibly bring to the table in terms of peace talks to the two countries?
I mean, realistically speaking, the Ukrainian demands and the Russian demands are continents apart. However, I think there is a realization in Europe and in Ukraine that ultimately this war will not be won on the battlefield, that the sheer cost to Ukraine, to Russia, and beyond, including in Africa and elsewhere, is such that the court of global public opinion will soon veer in either direction. What Russia has done is tried to sustain a position of global neutrality that does not condemn its occupation of Ukraine, and what Ukraine has perhaps realized that if it is seen consistently or portrayed by its opponents in the war as a vassal for the West, that it will lose the sort of global South support. So Ukraine has made frenetic efforts to engage the Africans, as have the Americans, as have the Russians. And I think that the Africans have a good chance not to end the war, but at least to find a midpoint between Putin's 4-point plan and Zelensky's 10-point plan, as well as everything in between, the Chinese plan and what the Vatican is proposing.
Yeah. Do they really? Because even though, you know, Africa taking a stance, and we'll take South Africa, who have been very vocal about this, saying that they're not taking sides, that they're having this whole, the whole initiative of being non-aligned. But when you look at it, it does certainly seem that there is much more alignment to Russia than there is to Ukraine. Just take rumors coming out that South Africa have been, you know, in the midst of a scandal of supplying arms to Russia through the whole ship issue and the debacle, which we're still waiting for a study to find this. But we are aligned to BRICS. We are on the side of BRICS when it comes to this, even though we say non-alignment. I mean, is this really going to bode well?
Well, I think that the mix of countries that you refer to, Senegal, Congo, Brazzaville, Zambia, Uganda, Egypt, Comoros Island, and etc., provide a fair balance. There are some countries that are closer to Russia and that have referred to what's going on as a proxy war. There are other countries that have taken the position that Russia has not complied with international law, that its act constitutes an act of aggression. So within the Africa group is a fair balance. Granted that South Africa may historically, and even within the current configuration, be seen to be more sympathetic to Russia. But when you take a group as a collective, I think it's a much more nuanced set of positions here.
Yeah. So, I mean, they also have said that President Ramaphosa noted the peace plan that has been proposed by China and affirmed South Africa and these African leaders' supportive initiatives that are aimed at a peaceful resolution. How much influence does China actually have in the African leaders' agenda during this particular mission?
Well, look, it does, as do the Americans and the Europeans and the Russians. But I think the most important point is to look at what is it that Ukraine is demanding and what is it that Russia is demanding and what can the African leadership, because this mission is actually not about pushing the parties to the table as yet. It's a listening mission. It's to try and understand the nuance of the position. So from the extreme, which is Russia's notion that it had a legal obligation to protect the rights of ethnic Russians in the Ukraine, based on the 1997 Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation, partnership between Ukraine and Russia, or that the government in Kiev is illegitimate, having been brought in by a coup, and Moscow's interests are under threat, or it's trying to counter the expansion of NATO, to Ukraine's own demand that this is a war of aggression. This is an unlawful occupation in violation of international law, that therefore those involved in it have become international criminals, and that what ought to be done is to establish an international standing mechanism to try them for a war for the crime of aggression, and that you needed sanctions against Russia. The extremity of position and the interests that are not in the room when you are talking to Kiev and to Moscow, the Americans, the Europeans, will be determinant, and don't underestimate the interest of the Indians, the interest of the Chinese, and etc. I suspect what the Africans will be able to do is more or less reach some form of understanding of the dire situation on the ground, but I'm not sure that they'll be able to move Russia from its position, which is essentially that for it to consider peace, Kiev must denounce any membership of NATO, and that it must go through denazification and etc. And Kiev's position that Russia must totally withdraw from all territory, including not just the eastern provinces, including the Crimea Peninsula. These are the UN tried in 2014 to get resolution to the Crimea question. There have been many other questions. I'm not sure that, given the extremity of positions, that a group of 6 African presidents will necessarily get the resolution immediately. But I think they'll move us a little further than we are now.
Well, one can only hope. But the critics say these presidents, each of them, and we went through them in the introduction of the countries that are being represented. Each one of these countries have their own issues to deal with. And, if we look at, we just have to look at what's happening in Uganda, with certain rules that have been passed with regard to homosexuality and the issues that are being held in this country and how they're spoken to there. Then we can look at other issues that are currently happening in wherever it may be. In Zambia at the moment, if we look at Senegal, there are major problems that are happening in Dakar. There's also Egypt that is included in this particular visit as well. Each of these countries come with their own issues, and many are saying they can't clean up their own house. How are they going to go into such a major war and even try and mediate? So perhaps we need to get this right. Is this a fact-finding mission or a mediation mission?
Well, all mediation starts with fact-finding. It starts with a listening post. I think the position, whilst understandable, that you've just articulated, it does not always it doesn't reflect geopolitical reality or even historical reality. The countries that help South Africa Yeah, the countries that helped South Africa negotiate its way out of apartheid were mired in structural racism and all sorts of difficulties themselves. The countries that helped Zimbabwe negotiate its way to independence and etc. So peace negotiations, ceasefire negotiations are never transacted by priests only. Often countries that come to the party with internal contradictions purport to promote a much bigger and larger international set of principles, or at least to be acting in the common good. They are sometimes able to move things along. Look at what South Africa, with all its problems, was able to do in Burundi, the negotiations on the Congo 1, Congo 2, negotiations on the Sudan, South Sudan. They were not transacted. Ethiopia was going through a very deep crisis when it was negotiating or bringing warring parties in South Sudan together. Granted, I think that we must always keep in mind that it seems rather odd that the same sort of agency has not been applied by the African Union to dealing with the Sudan. It was not applied to dealing with Ethiopia. It's certainly not been applied to dealing with Mali.
Yeah.
The sort of concerted, high-level, intense effort where you actually have on-site visits. I'm yet to see the same set of presidents or any other set of presidents make a visit to the Sudan, let alone South Sudan, Central African Republic, Northern Mozambique.
Yeah.
They've set envoys as though this is so remote, but I think Ukraine poses a very clear and present danger to global peace, the occupation of Ukraine by Russia and the war, and the reasons and justifications given. And on both sides, you do find some cogency in the arguments that are being made, whether it's Russia's apprehension of the NATO expansion into its neighborhood, or Ukraine's protestation that this is actually an unlawful occupation of its territory by a former imperial power.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such an important issue, because this is exactly what a lot of people are talking to. I mean, to try and see this amount of African leaders taking the initiative to go forth into Russia and Ukraine, where right on the continent people are dying on a daily basis in the most horrific manner, with wars that are raging in so many different African countries. The refugee crisis is one that is just on unprecedented proportions, where the displacement is caused within wars and warring factions on our own country and in our own continent. And this is very, very worrisome. Yes, we do obviously talk to food insecurity and the worry of many things that come from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but there's nothing new when it comes to wars and the loss of life on the continent. And yet we don't see as much interest from these leaders to try and create peace. Why is that? I suppose we need to ask these kinds of questions.
I think that we adopted principles. First, it was the principle of non-interference in the sovereign affairs of another state. And then, of course, we moved into the non-indifference under the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. But we are structured in such a manner that neither the African Union Commission is presently structured, nor the regional economic communities actually have the legal basis for the sort of interventions that are needed to stop the carnage in our neighborhoods. But what was also lacking is political will. I suppose our leaders have been reticent to pronounce themselves publicly or in condemnation of their peers who are acting in flagrant violation of the African Charter and African norms and standards. And what has tended to happen is that most of these conflicts on the continent too have external, if you like, dimensions to it and interests and complex regional interest, whether it's in the minerals economy or the extractive industries or some other complex geopolitical factor. I think that the African citizens must, in view of this initiative taken by African leaders, demand that similar initiatives be taken with respect to conflicts in the region and to enforcement of African Union norms and standards on democracy, on governance, on elections, on peace and security. The African Union Peace Fund is not yet fully replenished. The African Union Standby Force is not yet fully operational. The African Union's mechanisms for intervention intervention to ensure that the continent is not only peaceful but prosperous are not yet fully operational. It seems that we are most astute when it comes to dealing with distant problems, even if it is distant problems that actually have an impact on our daily lives, such as the Ukrainian question. I think that as Africans, we must demand that these double standards that we see from our leaders, a pretentious ability or appetite to broker global peace without a similar, I think, sensitivity and commitment to ensure peace in our neighborhoods. This is an indictment of either the disingenuous approach to global.
And I mean, I'm just reading. I mean, what you're saying is so correct. And I'm listening, having a look at a Financial Times article where, we talk about, I mean, this was, it's something, these are the things we need to look at, where in northern Ethiopia, they're talking, I mean, the whole issue with regards to the brutal civil war and the Tigray, they're saying that as many as 600,000 people have lost their lives there. And the impetus that is given to this and the attention, these are things we really have to question. We honestly do need to question this when we focus our interests and resources in other places. But let's quickly have a look at the second phase of all of this, because this is leading up to the Russia-Africa summit that's going to be held in St. Petersburg, Moscow next month. So, this whole peace mission, is that sort of gathering the information to get to that peace summit?
No, I actually think that we have major challenges. The Americans are going to an election in which this Ukraine war will be a factor. The instability we're seeing in Europe, the energy poverty, energy inflation, and general economic uncertainty in Europe, our own economic slowdown, China's seeming stagnation of sorts of slowdown. Globally, the global economy is taking a knock, and there is no real alternative. So I think this peace mission is both an African-led process, and there's one positive side to it, that Africa punching above her weight, showing that it can be a player in global affairs and bring resolution to global challenges, as opposed to the globe constantly trying to solve every single little African conflict that occurs.
Right.
But I think that what you and I are discussing is that we do need an infrastructure, we do need balance. We actually do start at home. You can't be a crocodile elsewhere if you are a lizard in your own continent.
Nice note to end it on. Can I ask you to take a bet on me? I've got literally not even 30 seconds. Do you think South Africa will host the BRICS summit or not? Do you think it'll be in China? Do you think it'll be in South Africa?
I think South Africa will, and it will be an act of defiance. It's a political test for them.
Brian Kahoro, thank you. A Pan-Africanist and lawyer talking to us about, well, firstly, the expected African leaders' peace mission to Ukraine and Russia, its intentions, and also putting his neck on the block, saying South Africa will host the BRICS summit as a sign of political defiance.
Yeah, you can't be a crocodile elsewhere when you're a lizard at home.